Good afternoon. Welcome to our Facebook Live broadcast. And I would like to welcome today and remind everybody that you should, if you need to follow our broadcast today, know that you can. This is in conjunction with Land or Home Family Laws, Modern Family Matters, and that we can update, and you can go to update to find out what we're doing on our Facebook Live page, on our Instagram, and on our Apple. Right now, I'd like to then turn and say we're going to have our, excuse me, I hate to do this, guys, but I had a glitch in my system, and I'm just going to fix it real quickly so that I can make this work for everybody. Sorry about that, I really am. Well, it's not going to work. That's okay, everybody. We're going to wing it a little bit right now. Right now, I want to welcome Chris Messina. Chris Messina is a certified board behavioral analyst, and we're going to talk about your child's mental hygiene and the pitfalls that pitfalls that you can fall into. So Chris, let's start off with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. So yes, I'm technically a board certified behavior analyst, which is essentially a behavioral therapist. And I work with children and families who are struggling with a whole host of behavioral challenges. And ultimately what a behavior analyst does is we look at the functions of behavior and the variables in a child's environment that are maintaining behaviors that we don't want to continue seeing. So my job is to figure out how do we modify a kid's environment, and how, as the adults in their world, do we teach them lagging skills that will help them learn a whole new set of behaviors.
Well, Chris, that kind of brings back the concept that we talked about of mental hygiene. Now, we all know that the coronavirus pandemic has put a tremendous emphasis on practicing good hygiene habits. I mean, we're disinfecting everything in sight, including groceries. We're using hand sanitizer everywhere. We're washing our hands after every activity. We're changing and washing our clothes, it seems like multiple times a day, every time we come in from being outside. We're wearing masks in public. We're social distancing. You know, these are all great ways to prevent us from being infected physically. But what about mentally? This seems to be really also infected against mentally. How can we help ourselves from being infected mentally, especially our children during these times?
Right. That's a great question. In the way that you've just defined the physical hygiene, right, we're taking really proactive steps to try and avoid negative outcomes. The same applies for mental hygiene. So being proactive as parents is going to go a long way, ideally, in preventing some concerning long-term negative outcomes emotionally for kids during a really, really uncertain time. So I'd love to speak to some of those pitfalls that you referenced earlier and look at what are some likely kind of traps that we might fall into as parents during this time period, and what can we potentially do to avoid those. And then if we've already fallen prey, which is possible, what can we do to correct for those?
Well, that sounds wonderful. I mean, for the last 3 months, it seems to me, kids have been locked up at home, trying to finish the school year. Many cases, they're locked up in their home with their parents who are working remotely from home. And now it looks like we're already planning for next year's school year. I mean, yeah, that's got to be difficult.
It is. It's tremendously stressful. As a parent, I can attest to that. So I think the first pitfall that I would anticipate, and I've seen in my practice, is, and it's a natural tendency, it's kind of for parents to scramble and kind of play makeup for what they perceive as, and quite in reality was, missed academic time. Kids were homeschooling and weren't having the sort of full breadth of education that they would in school. So I think as parents, our tendency would be to say, how can I double and triple down in terms of, makeup work, online classes, tutoring throughout the summer. And while that may be perfectly appropriate for certain kids, and they can absolutely handle that, a lot of kids that I'm seeing um, cannot manage those demands given their current levels of anxiety and just overall stress, given what's going on. So even though we probably feel like it's the right thing to do as a parent, right? To kind of make sure that they're tracking academically or with other skills and lessons and music lessons and whatnot. I would caution parents to really uh, take stock of their child's mental wellness right now. They may very well need the opposite approach for these coming summer months.
Are there any kind of specific opposite approaches, ways you can help relieve that?
Sure. Well, I mean, at the core of what's causing so much stress and anxiety for kids is obviously isolation, as it is for adults as well. So I think that, as a parent, my tendency feels like I want to limit technology time. I want to make sure that, the time is being spent in a more productive way. I actually think the kids need um, a reasonable amount, but maybe more than you're comfortable with, amount of time on technology to do FaceTimes and Zooms and texting with friends, because that connectivity is the single thing that I feel is going to keep these kids happy and well during this time. So maybe flexing your muscles a little bit with tech would be a really prudent thing to do this summer. I think when this all began, everybody was, at least in my circle, was pretty excited about doing family game nights on Zoom and all sorts of, maybe get-togethers with relatives from afar. And I think we've probably all exhausted ourselves. And if we can circle back and look at ways to maybe increase exposure, let's kind of go back and loop back to where we once were. And I think that making careful decisions with which your family is comfortable, in terms of exposure to other people is obviously critical, but, it's summertime. There are ways to connect with other people outside in ways that will make you still feel safe. And I think we need to do a whole lot of that if we can.
Can we can now sort of get outside. We can sort of be together.
Yeah.
Are there things we can do with some physical connectivity, that can also help us sort of bring us back into the real world?
I mean, sure. I've seen all sorts of creative things as I drive around neighborhoods. I see people having parties across the street. I see, children engaging with one another, from across yards. Obviously, we want to follow safety protocols. But I do think that we need to prioritize the connectivity that kids absolutely are going to need this summer, and kind of look at where we're at with our own anxiety about exposure. So we don't want to make ourselves uncomfortable. We don't want to be unsafe, but I think we have to keep coming back to the benefits that these kids will accrue from repeated exposure to peers.
I totally see where that makes sense. It's now summer. School's out. So, I think a lot of parents are saying, well, now we just need to get through till September. That's our plan. Just get through till September. Is that really the case?
Well, as an educator as well as a therapist, I think that we all know that this is not over anytime too soon. That whatever the school year coming looks like will not be typical as we've known it in the past, right? So I think we do need to buckle up and get ready for uncertain times for a longer period than just the summer. So pitfall number 2 that I have seen this spring, even when we weren't certain what was coming in the fall, which is concerning already, is that a lot of parents with whom I work are kind of behaving or allowing kids to adopt the mindset that we're on a permanent summer vacation. That this spring was unusual, so ultra late bedtimes, sleeping past lunchtime, unlimited time on technology, loosening the reins on any kind of real structured day was sort of what I was observing in a lot of households. And that can be really, really problematic for a whole host of reasons.
How the heck do you, as parents, change those habits? Because those habits can get ingrained really quickly.
Really quickly, and I see that already. So we had this kind of unusual scattered spring, kids at home. Now it's summer. So a lot of families kind of anything goes in summer, which I don't totally recommend either, unless you're on a vacation and have made that choice intentionally. But I think that the primary way to address this is to, as a family, in whatever format makes the most sense for your family, generate a weekly schedule. So on Sunday afternoon, kind of roll out the week ahead, and be realistic, right? Sure, summertime, days are longer, kids can stay up later. I get that. But a 10-year-old staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning on their iPad, that's not good. That's not good practice. So I would say, try to let's be creative. How are we going to keep these kids busy during the summer when there are very few camps, and a lot of folks aren't even opting for camps this year? Whether it's
I was just going to say, so setting the schedules are great. It definitely kind of helps people become more ready for what's ahead, and that whole uncertainty thing that's going out right now is, to me, seems like a big part of the problem. Nobody knows what's going to be the next day or the next day or the next day. So when you're setting schedules, are you talking about the mom and dad are getting together and setting it and then going to the kids and saying, here it is? Or is this a time to have some collaboration with the kids?
This is a time. This is absolutely a time for collaboration with the kids. I'm pretty sure that would not be well received, especially on the age of your kid. I work a lot with teenagers. That's not going to fly. But I do think that the entire family unit will run more smoothly if we are getting up at a reasonable time, having somewhat regular meal times. You and I had chatted in the past about the idea of dressing for the job you want. I'm thinking now that this is sort of dress for the day you want. I have, with colleagues, joke that we are oftentimes in our pajama pants from the waist down because we're working virtually, right? It's actually, in my opinion, not a great option for how to conduct your summer. Staying in pajamas all day, I feel like it kind of breeds laziness, so we don't feel really inspired to get up and move. And in the long term, what concerns me about long days, lazy days in pajamas is that the return and transition back to real life, whatever that will look like, it will be that much harder because we have many, many months ahead for these behaviors to take root. So undoing concerns me in the future.
Oh yeah. In the absence now of like camps, summer camps, the other social gatherings. I believe we talked about, kids who are in musical or theater in the summer, and all of these things that they get to go to, which keeps them active. They may not have that now. Or again, maybe they can. Are there ways that remotely and again with some sort of physical closeness replicate some of those things that they're losing?
Right. Well, I think as parents, we've all been bombarded with emails about virtual camps and virtual options for lessons and things, which for most kids feel less than ideal, but some of them are worth looking into. I think that there are ways to access some healthy activities online for sure. And I think we have to get creative. If we're comfortable with our adolescent child being a dog walker for folks in the neighborhood, maybe that's an option. Maybe we encourage our kids to put together a flyer and they can safely do something like that. I know a group of girls with whom I work are starting an Etsy shop, and they're going to be making pet food. So things, that potentially are not ways in which we would, typically spend our summer. I think we're going to have to be creative, and I think we're going to have to work with kids. And to your point, do we just roll out plans and then enforce it for the kids? No, but I do think that kids' stress levels are so high right now, and I'm seeing an abundance of anxiety and depression, not surprisingly, that I don't know that independently that they're going to generate these ideas. I do think we need to advocate for them, maybe offer some suggestions as parents, because I'm seeing kids kind of default to phone time, bedroom time, isolation time. So I do think we need to encourage them while allowing the voices. Yeah.
I remember when our kids during the summer would put together kind of random little musical plays, and there'd be 8 or 9 of them. They do it in the backyard. At that time, they were fairly close together, but it seems to me things like that. I believe you said your kid is in choir, and maybe do a concert in a backyard where everyone could be 10 feet apart. I mean, it seems like that could have not just the day of the event, but just again, in terms of planning and looking forward and kind of getting back into being excited about doing something.
Right. I think if we're creative and if we're open, and I think at the core of this conversation is the idea that keeping that mental hygiene always top of mind will help us as we make tough decisions as parents, because there are no easy answers, right? We're all confused, we're all uncertain. But I think if we keep remembering, right, that isolation, while it may feel the safest physically, it's not going to be the safest long-term mentally. And I just think that parents, especially of our adolescent kids, I find that ages 12 to 17 feel really at risk in my practice, that we really keep reminding ourselves daily, these kids have got to have some way to connect. So yes, we're scared. Yes, we have our concerns, all of that, totally valid. But also, well, then what are we going to do, right?
So what sort of things, I know that you work with kids all the time. So what sort of input or feedback are you getting from kids? I mean, what are their complaints? What are their desires right now?
Well, that's a great question. In fact, most kids, not surprisingly, communicate through behavior. That's why I do what I do, right? So their communication isn't verbal the way that maybe an adult might sort of express themselves during this hard time. So what I'm seeing in my practice is a really sharp increase in agitation. For kids who were already maybe a little bit physically aggressive, I'm seeing tremendous spikes in physical aggression. But even for kids who are not, just a general kind of a little bit more of a sourness in their behavior, because they're bored, they're lonely, they're unstimulated, they're scared, right? So they are not coming to me and sharing those emotions the way I just expressed them to you. They're showing me. So my advice to parents is this: make sure that on a regular basis, you are checking in with your kid, and not just a how you doing, like give it the time, listen to your child, in whatever way you can elicit information from your kid, do so, get a pulse. Where are they at? Because what I'm finding is if I initiate the conversation and I start to talk about some of my concerns, I can get some momentum and kids follow suit. But I'm not finding kids initiating these conversations because they're uncertain about how to do so right now.
Wow. So parents working from home, you know, it looks like they don't just have this naturally covered better than parents that are not working from home. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying, it's not enough just to be at home and to be there and to be the sort of, non, starting point, but just sort of being there as like, a sounding board isn't maybe enough. I mean, it's not just all good because the parents are home with their kids.
Right. I mean, sure, there are benefits. I think there's increased quality time home. There are more of these, connected nights, game nights and movie nights and all that because we're all home. However, I think a pitfall that I've seen, and frankly, I experienced myself, is that, the lines become very blurry. When you're home, your kids are home, during the spring school, homeschool period, I think we are so busy and so exhausted that it feels like I'm here. They know I'm here and they will come and get me if they need anything. Now, I'm not sure about everybody else's kids. Mine come and get me when they need food, but they're not coming to me when they need emotional support, because again, that's not really in their sort of behavioral repertoire at this point. So it isn't sufficient for us just to be present. I think it can feel like it is. I'm here. This is great, right? They know I'm here. I think we need to be really intentional. I think we need to be checking in frequently. And I think we need to, as I said earlier, help to motivate, incentivize, plan, whatever, some interesting different things that they can do this summer. Because I truly think that they will default to what's comfortable, which is in my bed, on my phone, or on my TV, and I'm isolated. And that worries me.
That, again, I mean, it makes complete sense. And it's what I think everyone is sort of feeling is that there's got to be, people need to be more willing, even though they're already being challenged by 50 things going on, and everyone is saying, well, I am, already strapped and I'm stressed. So it's really challenging, especially for parents who work from home where their kids are home all day. I mean, that's something I think we all can agree to. But what about, can parents sort of fall into the susceptibility of that to, fall back on that? Well, what about me? I mean, I just can't do anymore. I mean, what's your answer to that?
Well, absolutely. We're gonna have to dig deep. I think we are all absolutely exhausted, totally spent, and we're worried and concerned. Living with uncertainty is incredibly anxiety inducing. So I think we have to acknowledge, right, and find our ways, hopefully adaptive ways to deal with our stress, whether it's the jog or, the cup of tea at night, whatever, find your stress management. And frankly, it's a great opportunity to just talk to kids about how we as adults manage stress, right? We can model for them during a time, hopefully some really positive ways to manage that stress. But I think that despite the exhaustion and despite the desire, probably guilty as charged, wanting to kind of just say, I think I'm done and I'm over it, we have to double down and triple down our efforts.
The kind of circling back on that and having to double down, being aware as a parent of your kids is, you were saying, is like really important right now. And you also said that a lot of kids don't express themselves by words, but by their actions and behaviors. Can we elaborate a little bit on that? Like, what kind of behavior should the parents be looking at that possibly might be an indicator of things they're not being told and that may be going wrong?
Great question. I think because anxiety is sort of paramount throughout all of this, let's talk about what does anxiety look like for different kids. And surprisingly, what I have found and observed in my work is that anxiety doesn't look the way that maybe we would typically think, sort of maybe a child who's tearful, kind of looking for affection, things like that, which certainly some kids do present that way. During a time of such extreme stress, what I'm finding, what I've always seen with kids, is that they present, like I said earlier, with anger, with agitation. They're very snappy. I'm seeing lots of mood fluctuations. And so that concerns me. Right? An inability to regulate, an inability to sort of access the lighthearted, joyful way that they maybe were 3-4 months ago. So that to me is a big flag. And, every parent knows their child, and if you're not aware, right? Like, let's start paying attention to what are those cues from my kid that their anxiety is taken over. Typically it's aggression and sort of excitability.
Obviously, the parents are sort of the first line of promoting, good mental hygiene for their kids. And I want to kind of circle back to that as parents, we teach our kids physical hygiene. We teach them to brush their teeth every day. We teach them to take a shower. We teach them kind of the things that are habits that they can get into. Are there mental hygiene habits or routines routines or ways that parents can model to help their kids?
That's a great question. I think two thoughts. So the first thought is, as a parent, a quick exercise you might really benefit from trying is this. Grab a sheet of paper, open up your phone, jot down the ways in which you manage anxiety. It's an interesting exercise as a parent because I think it's really easy to find and adopt not so healthy ways to manage that are maybe quick fixes. So let's get real with ourselves as parents about how do I manage, right? The second thing is, and I cannot overemphasize this when talking with kids, no matter the age, be vulnerable with your kids. I think as parents, it feels like we are the folks who should have all the answers, right? And I think letting kids know, I'm not sure, or I'm struggling too. And you know what? Here are some things that I've done historically to manage stress, but I'd like to try new ways. Talk openly, think aloud. I think kids absolutely benefit mightily when we are vulnerable and let them know, I'm not sure, but let's figure it out together. Or maybe we can try some new ways. Or do you have any ideas for me about things that are working for you? Right?
That makes so much sense. What it problem is, what it makes people do, what a lot of people as we talked about have a hard time doing, is listening and listening to each other. As you pointed out, you're thinking while you're hearing somebody already what your response is going to be, or your retort is going to be, or
what your shopping list is going to be
for the your shopping list
or
is
how foolish this person is for what they're saying. Our children need to be validated. No matter what your child says to you during this time, even if it sounds preposterous and you're thinking, what's this kid saying? Validate, empathize. It'll go a long way. Yeah, listening is a biggie.
Are there any particular touchstones or activities or behaviors that a parent might see in their children where they say, hey, this is more than just for me? I think, maybe it's time to consider having my child see a therapist. I mean, what sort of indicators might be out there?
Yeah, I think you know your child's baseline. And if you see behavior that is pervasive, that's not the sort of fluctuation that we're seeing with stressors. I'm agitated today, I'm sad tomorrow, but then I have a couple of good days. If you are seeing pervasive, consistent changes in your child's behavior, it's a little hard to answer, right? Because I don't know the baseline of the kids that we're talking about, but you know as a parent, what's your child's typical affect? If it continues for any extended length, I would say virtual counseling is abundant right now and probably a great idea if your kid's open to it.
Well, and it's again, I think we talked about that. We don't really realize how much kids want boundaries, and kind of leaving them on their own isn't necessarily the right way to do things.
No, and that's why I just cannot overstate the importance of having a schedule, of having a plan. It will reduce your anxiety and your child's anxiety. It will make what is so uncertain feel a little bit more certain for your kids, and that is what they are desperately craving right now, is some semblance of certainty. So let's give it to them. And can I make one final recommendation for an approach that, as we talk about how to negotiate plans and schedules, I would strongly recommend that parents look at collaborative problem solving, which is something you should go online, explore. It is an approach that will allow you to more effectively manage what will be many, many months of ongoing conversations about how to manage this time.
So again, the many, many months. I think that maybe what we need to do as parents also then is to get out of the sort of feel good optimism of next month it's going to be different. So, we just got to get through one more month. It's always nice to have to just get through to the next one. But in this case, it sounds like some long-term planning is just as important as short-term daily planning.
Yeah.
And
I think collaborative problem solving can certainly help in many of the instances in which I work with divorced families. So I would strongly encourage folks to check that out, because I'm seeing a really heightened reverting to some not so healthy behaviors with co-parents right now during this time. So,
well, that makes sense, because it seems like the anxiety of one feeds and accelerates the anxiety of the other. You know,
right.
I mean, somebody has to start trying to manage their anxiety, and we should be the ones who start it, you know, because otherwise we're just making it harder for the kids, you know, to manage their anxiety.
Yes, this is not the time for an increased bickering between co-parents. Will benefit.
And that leads into, you know, Lander Home Family Law. We're a family law firm. We work with parents, you know, going through divorces, and, you know, even in the best cases of divorce, there's anxiety, you know, there's all of these things going on, and it would be really important, it would seem to me, to kind of address that.
Yeah.
So is there any other ideas about divorce clients that you would want to give to them, because they're, like you said, they may be having their own issues, and not really paying as much attention to their kids? You know, what would you say to them?
You certainly can't force an individual to keep the children as the core focus. I mean, right? That would be lovely if we could, but I can certainly remind folks, this is about the kids, right? So if we always keep the objectives clear, that we are troubleshooting or problem solving or creating plans for these children, right? Then we can hopefully eliminate some of the background noise, because it's a waste of time and energy, and there's not going to produce the results you want. So I think that it's a time to maybe check our egos at the door a little bit more regularly if we can, and make sure that we are always looking at what these kids need. Yeah.
Thank you. I think all of this is helpful. Any last minute or last statement you want to kind of emphasize? You've already emphasized several great ones, but I don't want to leave you out there if there's one more thing you want to say.
I mean, there are no easy answers right now, right? Parents come to me and they ask all the time, how do I motivate my kid? How do we do this? So the how to, we certainly don't have the time right now to address all of that. I am happy to share all of my, knowledge with folks who are potentially interested in learning more. So.
Well, that's what, that really is cool. Thank you very much. And I hope everyone has enjoyed this Facebook Live, found it helpful, despite my goofy start where the screen actually exploded on me. But got it back together, and I think it was just a great conversation. And for people who were not able to tune in to real time, but have follow-up questions, or people who are here and have follow-up questions, and following up on what Chris was saying, is feel free to email any of them to me at steve@landerhomelaw.com, and Chris and I will be happy to answer your questions. Also, you can email me if you have any family-related topics that you would like to see us address, legal or otherwise, or if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast. And again, I want to emphasize that if you want to get any updates for either our Facebook Live or our podcast, we have them on our Facebook page, on our Instagram page, and on the Apple Store. And I encourage you to go to them and follow us, see what we've got upcoming. And again, in conjunction with our podcast series, Modern Family Matters, we have all of that you can access. So until next time, everybody, stay well, stay safe, and stay sane. Thank you.